Okay, in this video example, we're going to look at graphing sinusoids when they have transformations. So for example, if we look at our first function, f of x equals 2 cosine of x minus 1, and we want to graph on the interval from 0 to 4 pi inclusive, what we can do is, we know our interval is 0 to 4 pi, so we can come in here, right, and make our axes. And we've got these little dots here to help us keep things straight. We can come in, we can make our axes. And a little trick that we have is to set our horizontal axes in tick marks of 4, right? So we say 1, 2, 3, 4, where the 4 tick marks will represent an entire period, and we will have 1/4 of the period, half of the period, right, and then the full period. And for our cosine function, we know that our traditional period is 2 pi, so it takes us from 0 to 2 pi. If we want to go from 0 to 4 pi, we can 1, 2, 3, 4, set up 4 additional tick marks. That'll take us to 4 pi. Of course, half of the period would be pi, and halfway between 2 pi and 4 pi would be 3 pi. Now, our amplitude is 2, right? Our amplitude is 2. However, notice that we have moved down by 1 unit, right? We have moved down by 1 unit. And so what I'm going to do is come in here and say that right here is -1, right there is -2, right there is -3, right? And I'll have +1 and +2. And I'm going to come in and make what I'll call my new center line, right? I'll call this the new center line, right? It's not an official term. I just, like to be able to think about it because when I draw my graph, I'm going to draw it based as if this were the center of my cosine function. Now, we have an amplitude of 2, right? And we know that our cosine function, its general shape is, if I think about a center line, the general shape of my cosine function is that it starts at a maximum, right? And then, after starting at a maximum, my cosine function at 1/4 of its period goes to 0. Then at half the period, it goes to a minimum, right? Then comes back up to 0 and come back up to a maximum, so that's the general shape of my cosine function. So that's what I'm going to look at, right? So here's my center, right? I go up 2 units, which would actually start me at 1, right? And then at 1/4 of my period, I will be at my center line. At half of my period, I will be at my minimum, right? At the next 1/4 of my period, I come back up to my center line, and then I go back up to my maximum value at the end of my entire period, right? So if I connect the dots, that might be what my graph looks like. Okay, and this though is only going from 0 to 2 pi. I need to go from 0 to 4 pi. So then once again, at 1/4 of my period, I'll be on my center line. At half of my period, I will be at a minimum, and at 3/4 of my period, I will be at my center line, and then at the end of my period, I will be back up at a maximum. And so I have the general shape of my graph, right? So I have 2 periods. I can see kind of this shape repeated twice over here. And in terms of getting our maximum and minimum, right, we know that for our cosine function, our range goes from -1 to 1. But if I'm going to have a vertical stretch by a factor of 2, that's going to take me from -2 to 2 for my range, because I'm multiplying by 2. That's my vertical stretch. And then I move everything down by 1 unit, move everything down by 1 unit. Well, that's going to take me from -3 to 1, right? And so I can see that my range goes from -3 to 1, and I have the graph of my function. Important to plot our points, important to understand that at the beginning and at the end of our period, the cosine is a maximum, and at a quarter and 3/4 of the period, the cosine is on that center line. Okay, hope that works out well.